In today's lesson, we will focus on classification of psychological tests. The main objectives in this lesson are to understand psychological testing, types of psychological test which include individual, group, verbal and non-verbal test. Psychological tests are often used to evaluate individuals at some turning point or significant juncture in their lives. Yet, in the eyes of many people, tests seem to be trials on which too much depends and about which they know all too little. Psychologists interested in assessing individuals must be able to define the most meaningful ways of discriminating between one person's personality and another's. To do this, they use psychological tests, standard measures devised to assess behavior objectively. Within the results of such tests, psychologists can help people better understand themselves and make decisions about their lives. Researchers interested in the cause and consequence of behavior or personality also employ psychological tests. Like the assessment that seek to measure intelligence, all psychological tests must have reliability and validity along with norms to make the test a standardized test. The first thing a psychologist does is to seek out others who have taken the test to find out how his or her score compares with others. Psychologists do this to develop norms. They seek out comparison groups whose performance on the test can serve as a standard of comparison for each individual who takes the test later. Psychological testing is important in formation of theories and testing hypotheses. It is an important aspect in making psychology a scientific study. These tests are classified into multiple types for better usage and easy identification. Now, let us study about some of these in the following session. Individual tests. A test can be said individual test only when they can be administered to one person at a time. Many of the tests in these scales require oral responses from the examinee or require the use of the materials. Individual intelligence tests are preferred by the psychologists in clinics, hospitals and other settings where clinical diagnoses are made and where they serve not only as a measure of general intelligence but also as means of observing behavior in a standard situation. According to Anastasi and Urbana, psychological tests involve observations made on a carefully chosen sample of an individual's behavior. A psychological test is often designed to measure unobserved constructs, also known as latent variables. Psychological tests can include a series of tasks or problems that the respondent has to solve. Psychological tests can include questionnaires and a one-on-one interview, which are also designed to measure unobserved constructs. There are several broad categories of psychological tests and they include achievement tests. These are tests that assess an individual's knowledge in a subject domain. Academic achievement tests are designed to be administered by a trained evaluator to an individual or a group of people. During achievement tests, a series of items is presented to the person being evaluated. A score on a test is believed to reflect achievement in a school subject. Aptitude test. These tests have been designed to measure specific abilities such as clerical, perceptual, numerical or spatial aptitude. Sometimes these tests must be specially designed for a particular job, but there are also tests available that measure general clerical and mechanical aptitudes or even general learning ability. An example of an occupational aptitude test is the Minnesota Clerical Test, which measures the perceptual speed and accuracy required to perform various clerical duties. A widely used aptitude test in a business is the Wonderlic test. There are aptitudes that are believed to be related to specific occupations and are used for career guidance as well as selection and recruitment. Attitude scales assesses an individual's disposition regarding an event, example a Supreme Court decision. Person, example a governor. Concept, example wearing face masks during a pandemic. Organizations, for example the Boy Scouts, or objects such as nuclear weapons on a unidimensional favorable, unfavorable attitude continuum. Attitude scales are used in marketing to determine individuals' preferences for brands. Typically, Likert scales are used in attitude research. Historically, the Thurston scale was first used prior to the development of the Likert scale. The Likert scale has largely supplanted the Thurston scale. Biographical information blank. The biographical information blanks, or BIB, is a paper and pencil form that includes items that ask about detailed personal and work history. It is used to aid in the hiring of employees by matching the backgrounds of individuals to requirements of the job. Next comes the clinical test. The purpose of clinical tests is to assess the presence of symptoms of psychopathology. Examples of clinical assessments include the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, or MMPI, Million Clinical Multi-Axial Inventory 4, Child Behavior Checklist, Symptom Checklist 90, and the Beck Depression Inventory. Next comes interest inventories. These tests are used primarily for career counseling. Interest inventories include items that ask about the preferred activities and interests of people seeking career counseling. The rationale is that if the individuals of activities and interests is similar to the model pattern for people who are successful in a given occupation, then the chances are high that the individual would find satisfaction in that occupation. A widely used interest test is the Strong Interest Inventory, which is used in career assessment, career counseling, and in educational guidance. Personality tests assesses constructs that are thought to be constituents of personality. Examples of personality constructs include traits in the Big Five such as introversion, extroversion, and conscientiousness. Personality measures are used in research and in the selection of employees. Intelligence test. An IQ test is an assessment that measures a range of cognitive abilities and provides a score that is intended to serve as a measure of an individual's intellectual abilities and potential. IQ tests are among the most commonly administered psychological tests. Projective techniques. These are used in examination that commonly employs ambiguous stimuli such as notably ink blots, Rorschach test, and enigmatic pictures, thematic apperception test, to evoke a response that may reveal facets of the subject's personality by projection of internal attitudes, traits, and behavior patterns upon the external stimuli. All the above tests are administered individually to know more about an individual in different settings to gather all the relevant information for assessment. These tests, through careful questioning or close observations, can be used individually or in a series to not only take an informed decision but also in deciding the course of action for a client. They can also be used for research purpose, job evaluation, and also in assessing their cognitive abilities. Let us have a look at the advantages of individual testing. More attention is paid. As the test is done on each individual one by one, the examinee is able to pay more attention towards that person. Due to proper attention, the results also come out to be great, and it is beneficial for both the individual as well as the examinee. The behavior can be observed easily. The examiner gets more time to know the individual as the individual is examined individually. By knowing the behavior of an individual, it is possible to manipulate and get results as expected by the examinee. The examinee can easily convince and encourage the person. The examiner in the case of an individual testing can encourage and convince the individual. By this manner, the individual can be encouraged and the right path could be shown to him or her. So, this forms one of the advantages of individual testing. The results are accurate. The results that come out by the use of the individual testing processes are accurate in comparison to that of the group testing, as it gives the end result more accurately and the results are examined from depth. Next, results and the scores are not dependent. The results of the individual testing are not dependent on any factors This not only delivers result in a quick manner, but also it helps in getting accurate results, which is useful for the future too. Also, the results are all made by proper scrutiny by the examinee. So, those are not dependent on any external factor. The speed is one additional factor. As the results are not dependent on any external factors, after examining, the examiner gives the result on the spot, which is an added advantage. The person does not need to wait for the required results. Next, the efficiency is way better than other methods. As the tests are conducted on an individual level, the efficiency ought to be great because all concentration is given over time on one individual. This is not possible in case of group tests. More time to understand the person. As the individual is in direct contact with the examiner, thus the examiner gets more time to know the person. Now, let us understand the disadvantages of individual testing. If individual testing has some advantages, then at the same time it has many disadvantages. Nowadays, many places prefer group testing, but it highly depends on the type of place. For example, if it is a clinic, it is obvious to have individual testing. Still, some of the disadvantages are as follows. 1. It is time consuming. The individual testing is quite time consuming. This is because each and every individual has to be taken into account during the test, and one individual can take as much time as needed. So, the process is quite lengthy and time consuming. 2. Trained and experienced examiner is required. For such individual tests, the experienced and trained examiners are required, and at times it is difficult to have the staff which is equally qualified and has the experience which is required for conducting the test. 3. It costs more than other procedures. As the test is conducted at an individual level, for every individual, stationery is required. If the written test is not conducted, then it might be verbal. Still, for verbal test also, lots of energy goes, especially when done on individual level. Questioning every individual and knowing the problems of every individual is a big task for the examinee. So, it forms one of the disadvantages of individual testing. Lots of money and investment is required. As an individual is to be examined, more staff is needed, and for the same, the investment also needs to be more with the company. So, for that to take place, the company needs proper funds and capital. However, it becomes an expensive process to take place. Let us understand what a group test is. A group test consists of tests that can be administered to a large group of people at one time. This is opposite of an individual test which is administered to one person at a time. Most testing today is administered as group tests, considering the many benefits that are associated with these tests. Examples of group tests include statewide testing throughout kindergarten to standard 12 students, placement examinations into college and placement examinations into graduate coursework. Some of the advantages of group testing are: one time, more people. As the name implies, a group test at a time, more people can be administered. It means at a time a very large number of people can be taken into account, which not only saves time but also it saves money and energy. The role of the examiner simplifies. No extra attention needs to be paid to the individual members of a group, which helps in simplifying the procedure of examining by the examiner. The scores are more objective. Scoring more objective means that when the group tests take place, the whole group works for a common objective. None of the individuals have their own personal goals. So, the process of scoring objectives is easier than the individual testing process. Better norms are established. The large group and the representative sample always lead to better results, and more importantly, it leads to better established norms. Efficiency is more. The highly verbal group can have a higher value of efficiency than that of an individual test, as many people are a part of a group. Every individual brings forward their views and ideas, which is really appreciable and helps to increase efficiency. The process is very flexible and gives more opportunities for the same, so it shows more efficiency than that of the individual testing process. Next, less power is required. The group testing does not require much power, both in terms of manpower and energy. As the work is done in a group, Each group is given one person to administer the following process. Unlike individual testing, each individual does not require personal attention. Now let us look at some of the disadvantages of group testing. The scores are dependent on other things. In the group testing, the scores totally depend on the reading ability of the individuals. Every individual has to go through the test even if he or she is a member of a group. So, the scores are highly dependent on the other factors like the reading ability and so on. The results and the information is less accurate. The group testing is said to be less accurate as the results that we get is combined. This is how the examiner fails to know the output of an individual level. So, individual performance remains unknown when it comes to group testing. Next, less cooperation is maintained. As the work is done through the groups, at times it becomes very difficult to bring in cooperation among the members. If the group fails to cooperate, then the results would get affected at the end. So, this is one of the disadvantages of group testing. The results are examined readily. The results are not examined readily because at times tired and the anxious examiner may fail to give proper attention towards the results. So, due to lack of good and proper attention, the results are highly affected. Difficulty to maintain rapport. It is difficult to maintain a rapport sometimes because it becomes difficult to control a group, especially when the group is large and orderless. Next, the interest is not easily maintained. It is very difficult to create the same level of interest among all the members of the group. This is because of the heterogeneous nature of the members in the group. So, due to the lack of creation of interest among the group members, it is difficult to get accurate results at the end of the day. The examiner's response in a more strict manner. Due to difficulty in handling the group, the examiners usually respond in a strict manner. So, this also becomes difficult to prepare and take a step for group testing. Next, boredom over easy items and frustrated over difficult ones. It is difficult to work in a group at times due to different situations that arrive in a group. Sometimes the members have to work for easy as well as difficult things. So, above are some of the disadvantages of having a group testing. Although everything has its own advantages and disadvantages, especially in companies, group testing is preferred when it has to be done on a large scale. The organizations have many employees within, and in order to save time, energy and money, they prefer for the group testing process. Now, let us have a look at verbal and non-verbal tests. Based on the nature of the test items, tests can be classified into verbal and non-verbal tests. Verbal tests are the tests in which responses of the testee are recorded in the verbal format and the emphasis is on reading, writing and oral expression. Examples of verbal tests are Jalota Group General Intelligence. Non-verbal tests are those which emphasize but do not altogether eliminate the role of language by using symbolic materials like pictures, figures and so on. Such tests use the language in instruction, but in items they do not use language. Raven's progressive matrices is a good example of a non-verbal test. It is a test or measurement wherein performance rely upon one's capacity to handle words to test the verbal capacity. The verbal test will take approximately 1 hour to complete. These verbal tests are measures of verbal ability and verbal fluency. Verbal ability is the cognitive ability to use and understand language. The ability may be thought of as having a number of components such as language proficiency, oral communication, verbal memory, etc. Verbal fluency. It is an aspect of verbal ability and is the facility to use words quickly and accurately both when speaking and when writing. Now, let us consider examples to understand verbal and non-verbal tests. The Wechsler's Adult Intelligence Scale WAIS. It is an intelligence test first published in 1955 and designed to measure intelligence in adults and older adolescents. The test was designed by psychologist David Wechsler, who believed that intelligence was made up of a number of different mental abilities rather than a single general intelligence factor. The WAIS 3, a subsequent revision of the WAIS and the WAIS-R, was released in 1997. It provided scores for verbal IQ, performance IQ, and full scale IQ, along with 4 secondary indices, that is, verbal comprehension, working memory, perceptual organization, and processing speed. Verbal IQ (VIQ) includes 7 tests and provided 2 sub-indices, verbal comprehension and working memory. The Verbal Comprehension Index included the following tests: information, similarities, and vocabulary. The Working Memory Index of WAIS 4 included arithmetic, digit span, letter numbering sequence, comprehension, and again a series of letter numbering. Performance IQ or PIQ included 6 tests and it also provided 2 sub-indices, perceptual organization and processing speed. The Perceptual Organization Index or POI includes block design, matrix reasoning, picture completion. The Processing Speed Index includes digital symbol coding, symbol search, picture arrangement. These are the various components that can be tested using WAIS. This figure talks about task description and the abilities these tasks measure. The table focuses mainly on the verbal comprehension. Task similarities. Similarities describe how 2 words or concepts are similar, and this measures the abstract verbal reasoning and semantic knowledge. Vocabulary task. This focuses on name objects in pictures or define words that are presented to the individual. This measures semantic knowledge, verbal comprehension, and expression. The information task focuses on general knowledge questions. It measures degree of general information acquired from culture, and the comprehension task talks about questions focusing on social situations or common concepts. It measures the ability to express abstract social conventions, rules, and expressions. With this help of verbal ability, we can measure an individual's intelligence taking into consideration the socio-cultural context. Raven's progressive matrices. Raven's progressive matrices, often referred to simply as RPM, is a non-verbal test typically used to measure general human intelligence and abstract reasoning, and is regarded as a non-verbal estimate of fluid intelligence. It is one of the most common tests administered to both groups and individuals ranging from 5-year-olds to the elderly. It comprises 60 multiple choice questions listed in order of increasing difficulty. This format is designed to measure the test taker's reasoning ability, the inductive meaning making component of Spearman's G. G is often referred to as the general intelligence. The tests were originally developed by John C. Raven in 1936. In each test item, the subject is asked to identify the missing element that completes a pattern. Many patterns are presented in the form of 6 into 6, 4 into 4, 3 into 3 or 2 into 2 matrix, giving the test its name. Because of their independence of language and reading and writing skills and the simplicity of their use and interpretation, they quickly found widespread practical application. Now, let us sum up the lesson. Whether it is individual test or group test, or whether it is administered verbally or it is a non-verbal test, psychological testing is a big business today. It has emerged as an important tool of objective psychometric assessment of psychological and social attributes. A psychological test is an objective procedure for sampling and quantifying human behavior to make an inference about a particular psychological construct using standardized stimuli and methods of administration and scoring. These psychological tests have been classified in many ways. Individual tests are administered to one person at a time, and group tests are primarily designed for mass testing. Speed tests are timed tests that examine the subject's speed of responding. Power tests contain items according to the increasing order of difficulty. On the basis of behavioral dimensions measured, psychological tests are classified into personality, intelligence, aptitude, achievement, and creativity tests. The personality tests measure a person's individuality in terms of his unique traits. Intelligence tests measure global mental capacities of an individual. Aptitude tests gauge an individual's capability of learning a specific task. Achievement tests evaluate a person's past learning. Creative tests measure a person's ability to think novel ideas. In verbal tests, responses of the testee are recorded in the verbal format, and non-verbal tests use symbolic materials like pictures, figures, etc. Nilgiri Non-Verbal Ability Test is also one of the measures of general ability. The Nilgiri Non-Verbal Ability Test is a non-verbal measure of general ability designed by Jack A. Neglieri and published by Pearson Education. The Neglieri Non-Verbal Ability Test, or NNAT, is an individual form, was first published in 2004. The two versions were published in 2007 and 2008 respectively, and the most current format, NNAT3, and like all non-verbal ability tests, it intends to assess the cognitive ability independently of the linguistic and cultural background. These tests may be administered to kindergarten to 12th standard school children on an individual or group basis as a means to identify potentially gifted children for placement in accelerated programs. It is also used by admission by several high IQ societies. For instance, the INTRATL accepts scores at or above the 99th percentile. The NNAT has been founded by one study to show excessive score variability, with within grade standard deviations reaching as high as 20 points. This has the effect of both overrepresenting and underrepresenting index scores. That is, more students received very high or very low scores than expected. Lohmann et al. Found that 3.4 times as many students scored in the 130 plus range on the NNAT as expected. So, this concludes the NNAT test.